get started. So I think, so this was shared a while back by a guy from Google that is no longer in the community. He got moved to a different project. But the document is still sort of valid. Well, things have changed here and there. But then what we care about is the observability part, which unfortunately wasn't really done on our one. But the code is in place. So this has changed a little bit. This actually hasn't changed a lot. So the NF topology, which I wrote the base code, does talk to PVS controllers, and at the same time it sends a CL to the Edge status aggregator. So this is a piece of module that Google seeded to the community. What that does is internally creates a graph based on the intent. So we have a very rudimentary CLD for deployment descriptions that happens to include topology informations. So I wrote this because we want to do connectivity check, basically, nothing more than that. And then so that part of the code used to be part of the, so all these are open, so you can actually take a look at it. It's actually part of the NF deploy controller. So we seeded something called NF deploy controller. That portion, there's a deployment portion which takes the older version of the NF deploy, if you will, CLD, CL, which would then construct a graph that connects things that are connected, like SMF connected to UPF type stuff. It's nothing like really special. It's not very detailed yet. But based on that, so when we seeded the code was basically the topology. What turns out to be part of the topology manager is NF deploy controller creates this deploy piece. That deploy piece, majority of it becomes not very useful because the community conversion to doing a lot of the fan out and deployment specialization type stuff, all on Porch and other things. The specialization and controller basically. But then we still keep this piece because it's useful. What it's useful for is it's a gRPC server. And then what it does is it's so on we talked about it with John and others in terms of installing Watcher Agent. So there's something called Watcher Agent. As you see this little block here. The Watcher Agent is created for each and every single workload cluster. And then so it will be like in fixing and things where the installation would all be part of that. The Watcher Agent by itself is actually the Watcher Agent is the gRPC. It's a client. So they're the gRPC client. By default, it does absolutely nothing. It's just sit there and watching a particular CL. That CL is basically sent out by the Edge status aggregator. So the idea is every time you have a workload cluster created, the Nephio system knows that a new workload cluster is being created. And based on that, we have a deployment repo that we can send to. So we would basically send a package, a very simple one CL package that tells the target Watcher agent which gRPC endpoint you're supposed to be connected to. So when we create a gRPC server on the status aggregator, the Watcher agents, when you created it as part of the creation of the cluster, like in fixing, it get created. So we spin up this pod. It's basically just a pod, a service, not even a service, just a pod. And then it's a gRPC. So embedded inside is a gRPC client. It's watching a particular CL. The Edge status aggregator noticed, like a lot of the rest of systems, the cluster context or workload context gets seeded. We discovered there's a new workload cluster. From its name, we know what the deployment repo is, and then we push our CL informations down to the deployment repo, and then this watcher agent is basically watching that CL, so it knows the gRPC endpoint. So at that point, one thing that is exchanged is based on topology information. It would, if this is supposed to be running UPF, it would then tell them, oh, let's start watching UPF deployment status.
Okay. So
if it's running SMF, then let's start watching SMF deployment status. So those statuses, if there's any changes, so locally we keep a reference of what we just sent to the edge status aggregator, and then if we detect changes, this is a very dumb, binary comparison. And then if there's any changes, it would then proactively send it to the status aggregator. So in a way, the idea of status aggregator is it has a view of the entire deployment. So your deployment is defined by the topology. So on the full topology, I would know, oh, it's the UPF up or the SMF up and so on. So this is basically more for status input. It's not really a summary even. It's basically the full status. So it actually tracks all the statuses there.
So
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So thanks. I got some questions. So basically, you just want to. There are 2-3 things which I understand. First is that this status aggregator knows entire topology, right?
Yes.
How many workload clusters have been deployed? A.
And what network functions are being deployed on?
And what network functions have been deployed, and it store all those information in its some deployment repo, right, somewhere.
Yeah.
Right. And then what can it do based on that? So for example, let's say, for example, SMF have been deployed into the workload cluster 2, right? One instance of SMF has been deployed.
Right.
So is it running? That's all it will know, or will it know more than that?
It's so the status aggregator, the worker agent is extremely dumb. Let's put that out of the way first. You basically give them a kind version and group, GVK, and then they would look at that and just be pulling the status out of their GVK. And do they so for watcher agent perspective, there's no way for them to know what SMF versus UPF really is. For them, they take the status field out of that, and then just send it over to Edge status aggregator. The status aggregator itself needs to know what the status structure looks like. It doesn't do anything with it, but then it's storing it in a more structural way. And then because they know topology, they link the UPF that connected to SMF together. So it has. The knowledge isn't so much, oh, I know how 5GC is supposed to be hooked up. The knowledge is way more on the, now I can see that this thing called SMF is connected to this UPF. I know what the status look like. I also know when that status come out would be a time that I have to say something is wrong.
Yeah. And so I understand, I think I understand the purpose of it. It's more or less like a topology kind of a builder and understand which and all components are connected to which component and where are they, right? So it has an overall, kind of a network view kind of perspective. Okay. But right now, what you're saying is that status is as of now, it just query the status and it just knows the status of it. Like, for example, it's running or it failed.
Yeah. So going back to this, the next thing would be where how we define status, right? So this part, Vim is nice enough to just take what we have and then didn't really change anything. So it's extremely rudimentary, because as we talked about on the chat, when we started a project, at least I had an ambition that if you give capacity information, and then the capacity translates into how much resources this UPF is going to consume on the structure. It would be nice if based on multiple parameters, because the resource enough to sustain that capacity. And it's not very easy to know, actually. And then
Is
we
it?
have. So for example, I gave an example, right? So if for example your particular or any of the vendors, particular UPF, their throughput happens to be CPU bound, and then they go in and say, oh, I'm currently so if you give me a UPF capacity which is based on throughput with downlink and uplink throughput, and then let's say you give me 10 gig down and then 1 gig up, and then right now I'm doing 1 gig up, which is fine, but then I'm at like 3 gig down, but it's already 90% CPU. And obviously what we have done before in terms of a calculation based on a capacity intent, we're not going to meet that. So who is going to be able to tell me what this happened? At one point I thought, hey, operator should be able to know. Yes and no. Depends on how. So depends on many things.
I think
Normally people, almost every single Kubernetes deployments that I probably know of would be sending CPUs and memory information to, well, Prometheus. And then something like Prometheus. Doesn't have to, but then it's mainly a cloud monitoring thing that most likely is Prometheus. And there would be something on a Prometheus then, therefore, to be some logic that sits on top of that to be able to evaluate. A throughput information is also something that possibly it's not a. I don't think it's a requirement, but I haven't read the entire 3GPP specs. I say that for sure. That UPF would have to expose as a metrics, but at the very least, I would imagine most of the UPF commercial ones, not 35GC, would actually expose it by saying that at this point I'm, doing that much, periodically at least, and then so you should be able to do evaluation on top of Prometheus. So that makes sense until you in our architecture moving forward, not today, but then on more of an edge and core base or centralized management and an edge workload based infrastructure architecture. Most likely your Prometheus runs on management cluster. And then the collection, basically you probably not require, but some sort of Prometheus agent running on the workload clusters, do the collections, but then they have a direct mapping into the storage space and you just write it there to the centralized. So local operators may not be able to easily evaluate that, oh, I'm at capacity now.
Okay.
Yeah. So Stephen, it's Wim here. So it's so
someone else here.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it's Wim. Yeah, I was I joined. Sorry.
Okay.
The question which where I start. So the reason why I was interested. I know what the architecture that we have so far, but I believe there is a lot of, let's say, improvements that we can do.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes.
And so, I mean, if we go for this observability, for example, I mean, I had a discussion this week with our packet core guys, right? Which, for example, they do. So they are looking at. So they're building an operator for Canary and what have you, right? So for me, it is clear is that we need local metrics in the workload cluster, because there will be. If I look to this observability topic, it's very big, right?
Yeah.
Because what we did right now is, okay, we know a certain topology, we know what to collect, and then we collect from there, right? But you could also take another stance to say, I just start to collect in general, right? And based on the data that I get, I see that actually what I wanted is actually correct. Right, because it could be that someone basically spins up a UPF somewhere else which you didn't want, right? You will not detect it with this system at the moment, right? You see, so what I'm trying to get to is, what are we aiming for, or do we aiming? I would like to build.
So Sandeep's asking for something different, so I just want to get the baseline in place. So he's asking to do like fixed set of KPIs off of a particular set of network function or even services. So someone his example was actually pretty vague. It's saying that how much of the sessions get handover on this, and then there's a couple of things, right? One of these is it's kind of hard to get that from pre-5GC, so we have to investigate. And then B, in the same, so I'm basically more like, so today we care about status because why do I explain that CPU problem is because I would like to have a world where the status would be fully able to be determined locally in our workload clusters by the operator. Usually that's what the operator is supposed to do anyway, right? And then I told them if we build metrics a certain way, obviously it's not as simple because you may even have to set up permissions and things like that for them to even read a Prometheus database if it's sitting only on the
I mean if you look to a high level framework, right? So in general, I'm of the opinion that you need to have that there should be a central metric system inside of the workload cluster, and then there is an aggregated at the management cluster, right? So I think you need both. And then there's going to be permissions, of course, required to be able to who can access what, right? But let's first get the basic to work, and then because the permission is simply something you can figure out. Yeah. Right. So because it's an RBAC problem. So basically, what I'm trying to get to is that I'm of the opinion that what the architecture that I always was thinking about is that the central guy typically needs a more aggregated view because he's not going to be able to do let's say a real-time thingy, right? Or maybe that's maybe a little bit too short-sighted because there are people, if you look to the RIC and stuff like that in ORAN, they are trying to do much more real-time stuff. But okay, that's a detail. That's then the question is how much data do you get out of it? But I'm always of the if I look to the architecture was always so I collect the data locally on Prometheus or let's say we pick one, right, or something, and it's rather real-time data, right? But it doesn't store this thing for ages, right? So it's a real-time view of the metrics. So it's like an in-memory view of the data that you have locally inside of the cluster, right? And that gets pulled or pushed. So that's then another debate, whether we do pull or push to the management cluster, right? So that's one thing, right? And then there will be local people who need to have the data locally that consume it for real-time statuses or actions and eventing and what have you, right? And then there is going to be a central thing, which is going to be more like, typically the use case is like what we were aiming for here, like centralized topology view. Is it all good? Is there security things, or are there things that I didn't expect that are there? So things like that. And that can also be on real-time security local, right? But there can be an aggregated site over there, right? But that's kind of the framework that I personally had in mind with respect to what we should aim for. Now, then the question is, how do you go about it? But I'll stop here. I think Sandeep, you had a question.
I mean, actually, that's a kind of a broader way of envisioning all those things, and that's absolutely the right direction, in my opinion. But what right now we were trying to explore is it really possible? So, for example, if I am allowed to share my screen, I can just quickly.
Go ahead.
Let me know if you can share.
Let me.
So for example, So for example, there are two ways. Whatever we have discussed right now, there are two ways of. Let me begin. So there are two ways. Okay. Right now, whatever you explain is that all the NFs, right? They themselves actually expose all the KPIs. Okay, what are the KPIs? For example, if it is a session management system, it is exposing. Assume this is just assumption. Right now, as you know and I know, P5GC doesn't expose this, and I have gone through many blogs. I haven't found it, and actually have gone through some codes of P5GC. I couldn't find it. So suppose it exposes all this information. That this is the raw KPIs, right? Then we can talk about all those building all those systems, scrapping all those things, collecting this data using the Prometheus. Like if I write some Prometheus configurations to collect all this data and scrap it up and give it to database and all those things. From there on, it is very easy. Right now
So my view, Sandeep, is this, right? Let's say it does not expose it. We can emulate it.
Yeah. That's why I'm coming to the second point.
So we can simulate something that basically emulates the thing. So we can do two things, right? So in the meantime, I got in touch with someone of the Free 5GC and IETF who actually built the code. So we can ask them, can you add this into your code, right? And see what they say. If not, what we can do is potentially, for example, we have also the OpenAI, so the OAI, maybe they do it. And if none of them do it, we could potentially build an emulator, right? That basically just puts the data there, and we can start from that, right? So I basically building such a thing that exposes some of this data. It's fairly straightforward to build, right?
Yeah. So that's a first point. As you said, if it's not there, we do it. So that's the one way of doing it.
We emulate.
Yeah, you emulate and somehow we get it, right? Somehow we get it. Second point, what Stephen was saying is possible, I think. What he is saying that suppose a network function says that, okay, that my throughput depends upon the CPU, okay? So it's a kind of assumption, okay, saying that the higher the CPU is, the bad the throughput is. Right?
Yeah, this is based on the vendor though. So vendor knows best.
Yeah. So here is how I look at that, right? So every vendor will have its own way to consume it. So if I'm a network, so the way I look at it is the following, right? We have like data that we collect, okay? And there is standard, and there will be standard and non-standard data, in my view, right? So there will be standard data and non-standard data. The NF vendor, right, will have some logic to say, I want these KPIs to do my job, right? So, and we should, and every vendor will have their own metrics. And so for me, the observability that we have, we should basically build a prototype on how it can be done. Exactly. And then every vendor will have its specific things. But the framework that we should build is that we should have a capability to have that we can read any metric that we want, right? Based on what the vendor exposes. So, and secondly, and we have a mix of standard and non-standard data, but the operator itself will basically have an ability to say, I want these metrics. And then he starts to collect it. And then what that is should be vendors, can be anything. So we should build it in such a way that anyone can build its own metrics that he is trying to collect.
Yeah, so as an automation platform, we basically need a edge-based metrics collector. We don't want to pick a winner, but then at least we need to have a reference. And then we automate the process such that they will be able, it's readable by the operator, writable and readable by an operator. And then we'll show how an operator would be able to read those metrics and make a decisions on a sample set of KPI. And then as close as possible to standard, that would be great, because that seems to be solving the real problem. But then again, because of Free 5GC limitations, the metrics may not even be like valid per se. So
but then we emulate something, Stephen, right? So we just
we know we can
something,
and some of this we can go fancy and actually do something like reading NCs and Linux stats and all that stuff for like throughput type informations. Yeah, but internal stuff is probably, if they don't expose it, there's nothing we can do.
And you have a set of, let's say, I call it metric sources, right? So it shouldn't only be the network function. It can, like you said, it can also be sources that are
infrastructure related things like
correct. So that we have KPIs from various places. We do local collection. We can have local actions, and then we have an aggregation to the management cluster, which can do the same thing over there, right?
Yes.
Well, I had one small flow which I discussed and had in my mind. I wanted to validate with you people, which is something like this, So we're not sure how many things will be required to change. For example, this is one of the use case which we discussed internally and came up with. It's, for example, I don't know whether it belongs to intent-based automation, but actually it will boil down to the point that what we are discussing, right? Like something like a domain expert configurations. So this is what we had in mind, thinking that, so for example, let's say NF gives us the throughput, let's say for one example, right?
Yeah.
So what a domain expert will put into the configuration is, and this is what we are asking them to put it, that saying that, for example, if I need, a throughput of 90%, right? I mean, as a Samsung or as a, Nokia or anybody expert will say that to achieve throughput of 90%, right, in my AMF or whatever the function is, I need so and so resources to be always there. For example, my CPU should be this much, my memory should be this much, and I guarantee you, because I have tested it, right? And that's the way it will give me 90% throughput, right? Suppose.
Yeah, so this is when you tested it and then send it out as an intent and model it. So observability is validating on real time whether or not you tested it on your lab works, and then in here in this deployment it doesn't deviate. So that's the way I look at that. So yes, when you create an intent, so we always had that idea that you and cloud providers together are the only people that can qualify to run a Samsung UPF at 1 up and 10 down on a Google GDC platform would require that much isolated CPUs, that many VFs out of the Mac, and at least and then that's the parameters that you said. So we tested this, and then we think this is all we need, and then we created this. So observability is for that deployment validate that our test actually is valid in real life when it's
I was not going in that direction of testing this itself in the GCC. I was assuming that this may hold good for all the scenarios where our NFs are deployed, right? And then we were thinking of having kind of a intent to NF translator, right? Like for example, if the 90% of the throughput has to be achieved with the 10 instance of the particular AMF with such configurations, and that will be deployed, right? And then we can observe that whether we can observe based on the actual KPI which has been exposed by NF, which is not, or what you were saying initially that my down in the CPU, I assume that it will be down in my throughput, and that kind of scenarios, right? So that is one of the thought process.
So for me, this is okay, you're trying to build what the vendors are doing, right? And I think this is what we should not do in Nephio, because I think in Nephio we should see our idea is we have a blueprint, right? And the blueprint has a certain profile. What we are trying to do is to expose some parameters like capacity, right? That are generic enough that the vendor will implement or will translate into the specific data. If we try to build a system that emulates what the vendor does, I think every vendor has its own way of doing things, and we will never succeed, and nobody will probably take this. For me, I would be more, I think we create more value. For example, at the discussion that I had this week with our network function guys is like, okay, which metric system should we take? Right? So it's not about building that thing here. It's about how can I build a network function operator, right? And we will in Nephio do a prototype of it, right? That gives me that can interact with an environment that is so uniform that I don't have to change my operator every freaking time.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Basically
this is what this would do.
But the translation is something the vendor will do, right? The thing that we have to do is build an environment in which that translation doesn't have to be changed every time we come into a new environment.
It should not, because what we are trying to say is that this should be more generic.
1 minute, this is Varada. The generic framework which Wim is talking, right? That's what Sandeep naming it as domain expert configuration. So he won't expose. He's just going to build a framework, and people can decide the condition and action. So I think both of you are, talking the same thing. he just took some specific example, Sandeep,
Yeah.
but I think he's talking about the same thing, Wim, because when he says monitor KPI name, conditions, actions, some condition action, but yet he cannot specify that. He's leaving it, to
but so my point is this, right? Every vendor will do that by himself. Why? I don't believe that. In Nephio, we try to build an automation framework, in my view. We don't need to basically say to the vendor how they have to do stuff. We have to what the vendor needs, in my view, is we need to give them tools such that they don't have to integrate with 500 different environments.
No, actually not. See, this is what we think. Yeah. This we're thinking this as a generic, and this comes as a configuration file from every vendor, is what we're trying to say.
Actually, both are speaking. See, I'll rephrase.
See, let me say what we discussed this week. Yeah, let me discuss what we. Yeah, but let me rephrase what we discussed this week internally, right? So so there should be a way to say which metrics we need, right? What is so whether it's for me domain expert configuration, for me it's like I want these metrics to be collected. That's what you put into a CR or whatever system, right? What happens with it inside of the operator? I don't believe that you can build a system that is generic that vendors will adopt. So what we need is a way to expose what you want and how you will be able to get it. What you do with it, we can build a reference implementation inside of Nephio for 3.5GC or whatever thing. But I'm of the opinion that every vendor will use its own thing. So for me, the effort to try to make it something very generic, I think is not focusing on the thing that we have to solve.
The condition and actions, right? Yeah. Conditions and actions are leaving it to the vendor. See, actually, he's not trying to, decide the action. He's leaving it to the Nephio UI. If you see the point 4, he's exactly talking the same thing, but in a different language. He's also telling, hey, whoever knows, what are the KPI to be collected, please give it through external means. Say the conditions, and you please tell the actions, and we will do. I think, maybe I'm wrong, but both of you are speaking the same language.
But condition and action is like a workflow, is like that, right? So we have our own way to do that. So so what I'm trying to say is that I have more the feeling that it's better to help the vendors to basically say how to expose that information and how to integrate with the system rather than how to do it, how to develop what they do with the data.
Well, I got your point, Wim, actually. What you are saying.
That's my personal view.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm very clear what you're saying. What you're saying is that don't create any generic platform for them to take action on all the things. Just expose as much as you can, right, and let them do themselves. So I think that's the difference between what you are saying and what.
Yeah, you are trying to build a framework that the vendor can adopt to use it. I'm saying, okay, I'm not sure whether that's the right bang for the buck at this stage.
Yeah. Fine.
Because we have the first problem that we have is we need to build that system that is able to collect that data, right?
Yeah. So I mean, beyond that, actually,
If you look to, I make an analogy like the following, right? We have cluster API, cross-plane, we have KCC, we have many tools to build clusters. In Nephio, we try to avoid going into the same thing, right? What we are trying to do is say, okay, how can we make a cluster work inside of another environment, and so that's what we are trying to solve, the problem on how that cluster can be used and consumed in a broader environment, rather than focusing on how to build the cluster.
Well, I got your point, actually. So we can decide on that, like what we really want, that is it useful or not. But your point is taken, like, yes, we need to expose. So that is building blocks for us. Actually, we have gone beyond that, actually, envisioning whatever we could do with that. What you're saying is that let's first get down those information, right? And whether to build or not, you're not agreeing with the building. That I understand, but that can be taken later. But right now, we and you both can agree that point that we are looking to expose the KPIs from the NF. That is the common ground for now, at least I could understand.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. What I believe we have to do first is how does an NF vendor tells what he wants, right?
Right.
Not what he does with it, what he wants, right? And how we provide a system that is able to do that. The how he or what he does with it and how he consumes it, I think is for me is secondary. And yeah, in my view, I mean, maybe we tackle that at some point, but we first have to start with the basics because I don't think.
Yeah. Okay, so let's come back to the point where we agree. That means, I mean, finding the ways to do it. So what we have already concluded that the emulation point, right? And the CPU based, I mean, could you elaborate more on that, Stephen, about your,
Yeah, we can, no, so we can build a reference for sure.
Right.
So we want to, so for what we defined so far, some of the things that is definitely missing in terms of, so status is not metrics. So
Yeah,
let's get
not
that out of the way.
metrics.
Status is when you want to tell people whether or not you are meeting your expectations in a way, right?
Yeah.
So
and that's where I think, Stephen, where Prometheus has a bit of a problem. Prometheus metric. I mean, the way to do status in Prometheus is you do 0, 1, basically, right? So
so Prometheus, so Prometheus, the example I gave for Prometheus is in a distributed environment, I mean, assuming your edge clusters are light, which may or may not be the case in this case, then they're saying that you can put a Prometheus agent there, and then metrics are aggregated, well, not even aggregated, it's collected on the Cassandra, because their backend is basically Cassandra, on Prometheus on Central, and then the evaluations of those metrics is done on management. So I do agree this is not very real time, so probably doesn't fit our needs. But I'm just saying this is common deployment. And then so it would be nice to get requirements and then an understanding for us, or we should decide as a community, our best practice on this kind of deployment scenario, what kind of metrics collection systems we're looking at, how we distribute them. We want local collections for a very short period of time, so it's not a very long time series. And then the operator, we should set up samples such that the operator would be able to read write out of that. We should build sample controllers and things where infrastructure informations or other informations would also be pumped into the same metrics system. And then we may write a sample thing on top of the operator, outside of the operators, which would be continuously evaluating the metrics, and then allows people to say, give me a warning if something is deviated, or if the operator wants.
And Stephen, should it be only metrics, or can it also be state? In my view, it should be both.
Logs, all kinds of stuff, if we want to, yes. Or interface stats, all kinds of stuff. We should
because in some, I think you need a system that is on one hand pulling, but also can be event driven, right? So you can have basically a state change. You want to be very fast and acting potentially. So I believe we have to try to focus on all of these aspects. Maybe we focus on first one, but our aim is to have all of these in there, because
so that's the North Star that we want to build, and that's like an L2 thing. If we decided to build this in L2 and we have enough contributors to do it, for an L2 things, then we start smaller. And then so this is the one thing that is definitely missing today, if you want to ask me. I mean, status in general is crappy, but then for sure we have no ways to reflect that as your domain experts have evaluated by qualifying the system, by saying that, to meet that capacity requirements, I need that kind of resources. So they make that intent. They make that intent somewhere in the system from your vendor specific logic. You translated the high level intent, which is just on capacity. That would be true across all vendors. But then vendor, based on which platform you're going to deploy this, is now based on that capacity, would know exactly what kind of resources I should consume on this particular platform, on this infrastructure. And that would be because someone human manually did this. So this automation software from the vendor would know this is what it's supposed to be, and then that intent is translated, and then at the level of, say, a UPF deployment, it tells us exactly. Operator actually evaluated that today. It will tell you exactly how much is needed. So on the flip side, there's nothing, if that is actually turns out to be not true for whatever reasons. The observability part of this is to be able to know that we are off by a lot, even sometimes, and then be able to. So status is the warning part. So we don't have anything leading up to status, which is where the multi-dimensional metrics and so on evaluation needs to be in place. So I would like to see that, if anything. And that once we get that framework in place, any KPI supposedly should be able to feed into this. It's just the metrics or data sources changes, and then the evaluation, for being the operator. Let's say we evaluate using an operator, which may be and then for simplicity's sake, evaluate using an operator. Then the operator also changes logic by saying that, oh, that KPI means that I need to send a status warning out.
Right. So if I just understand this correctly, metrics, right? When we say collect metrics, does it include everything? For example, the resources, CPU, memory, disk, and the actual KPIs of that particular NF. Like, for example, throughput, internet latency, packet loss, and all things. Can it include both of them if they are coming from the different sources, and if those sources have been?
So in a regular cloud setup, all these things, all those metrics from various different sources all get aggregated into Prometheus. And then you can say from time A to time B, let's get all the metrics from this set of application. In your case, is application, right? The NF is basically a workload application, plus all the infrastructure stats. Let's dump it, and then some sort of evaluation engine will come in and start evaluating.
So the work here, what I see is more or less the Prometheus configuration, is it?
Well, it could be some
configuration
other stuff. So
read the sources.
If you want root cause analyses. So now we go to even a step further. Maybe you need logs, maybe you need traces.
And you need status. So we need status. So for example, it's good. So in Prometheus you can do up down, but if you want to say I am active or I'm inactive and I'm pending, you cannot do. You have to so Prometheus has a challenge with status, not with metrics, but with so you can emulate stuff, right? But state it's not so good for it.
States are usually done by something else. And then that something else would write to Prometheus by saying that at this point, my status is not great. And then I'll tag it by telling you that at this point is when I detected something is deviated, something is not good. And then from maybe a tag saying that I'm created and good to a point of not good, those are the time series related data that we should evaluate, we should analyze.
Right.
Plus other stuff that you can get to. So this is what it is good at. And it is basically it was designed basically just to do this.
So in general, we are looking into configuration of the Prometheus data sources, understanding the logs from the data sources.
That would certainly be the most obvious one to go for. So we Prometheus would
we can start with metrics. Start with metrics, for example. I think it's a good start.
Okay, there is some consensus.
And I'm okay with all your KPIs. So this is you want here to contribute. If this is what you're passionate about, as I said, we tell SIG1 that we are looking to build off an engine that will be exposing this set of KPIs, and then would be sending statuses if any of these KPIs deviates from our policies. Because in this case, the success rates at a certain point, when do you start doing warnings? I guess 10%, 2%, 1%, 20%. So based on that setup, so we can send alerts and so on. Right? So this is basically the kind of system that we aim to build, and we can get to it. We can finalize on the KPI, the set of KPIs, and then we inform SIG1 that these are sets that we are looking to implement.
So basically, even though once we configure, then let's say, for example, we got all the information from our various data sources, and we also understand that because of this reason, I can set some sort of alarm or some sort of a warning.
So as I said, taking actions becomes, to be honest, something beyond observability. But then taking actions are definitely something that could be done once you have those information. Once you can decide it, when you can you can decide based on your data informations that a problem has occurred or something that something missed this policy. Yeah, basically.
My question is the action part of the Nephio system, what we're trying to bring?
So
is the
as per
action.
Wim, no.
We all have different opinions. So
now because it is the way we are converging actually.
Yeah, so for me, I mean, if I look to the NF operator itself, right, we will do a reference implementation, but that doesn't mean that that's the only way that you can do it.
Yes. Yes.
You see, so that's my view of it, right?
Right. Makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, your action should be created. If your action becomes creating a cluster and deploy another UPF, that's obviously much higher level than like a workload operator.
So ultimately we should go there, right? That's what I'm saying. Ultimately, once you decide all those things based on the user, okay, this is my threshold and all the things, the action can also be customized. And what Wim is saying that we can provide some sort of a reference implementation. I'm absolutely okay for that.
Yeah, and that's what we typically do in Nephio. So we will have to show that the system works, right? So that's why I'm saying is, but what we should not try to do is build like initially a generic framework that we say, okay, this is the way that Nephio. If you want to do Nephio, you have to do this implementation. That's what we should not do.
If we get to that, we can get to that. But then I think actions. Before you even get to actions is the decision making, and then collections and all that stuff. So those first. And I think those should be for sure be part of a Nephio reference at the very least, because it's a very critical part. And then telcos users do ask for that. We're not particularly asking how do we hook up with service assurance, for example. So one thing would be, this is how you be able to expose KPIs and things off of Nephio.
Yeah.
And hook up with your service assurance engine.
I think we are all in sync actually, to be honest, because what we agree that we should collect, right? We should have configuration. If the Prometheus is what we're exploring, fine with that. And we collect all the information from the different sources. It can be direct metrics, it can be logs, it can be netstat or whatever it is. And based on that, a logic is there in somewhere, and maybe in Prometheus, to say that, things are wrong as per the conditions specified by the domain expert, for example, right? And then maybe we could leave it, from one point of view. From here, we don't care. The next point, what Wim is also saying, and which I was also saying, that we could do a reference implementation of taking an action. That could be a hard-coded action, or it could be a generic, way of taking it, So I think we are more or less in sync.
Yeah.
Like
but just to be clear, there is. So you go first.
I want to add here. I want to add. Then I'll leave it to you, Sandeep. What Wim is telling, point 4 in the diagram. Wim can later, concur with that. He doesn't want Nephio system to expose what to do. I mean, how to do. Sorry, condition, action. What metric to collect. He wants something like what to do only to be exposed by the Nephio. What to do, right? Not how to do. Whereas here in 4, how to do we are telling. Which KPI to collect. Which condition, which action. Am I right, Wim?
Yes, but I think there is also 2 different places where we will do actions, in my view. One is at the workload cluster and one is at the management cluster. And they are 2 different things. So what is not clear in the drawing here, in my view, I would make this drawing a bit different. So I would say I draw a workload cluster. I have a metric service. I have let's focus on metrics. It's easier. So I have a local metric service on the workload cluster, and there is an NF operator that interface with it, and the NF operator. Right, so we need a mechanism to say that NF operator can ask for which data he needs. Right, that can be in that workload metric system. You can have a configuration on the metrics because you could do aggregate. So the NF will either have raw data or it can be a configuration. For example, in permissions, you can basically put actions on the Prometheus system itself, right, which does aggregated things based on data it does. So we could have a configuration inside of the Prometheus system that triggers actions itself based on data it sees, which then the user or the network function could consume, right? So that's all happening on the workload cluster. And then we need something that exposes the data from the workload cluster to the central cluster. And then there is a different set of actions. For example, the thing that Steven wants to build is give me a view of what is the status of the thing that I was going to deploy, right? So that is another way of consuming the data, but then at the management cluster to give a service assurance view of how the thing works, right? But for example, what happens on the workload cluster is a local action. For example, all of a sudden I see a spike, I need more cores, or I need another pod or something. It will do that locally, right? It will locally spin it up, right? Whereas in an aggregated view, we basically say, okay, this is what's going on, right? So, but what I with respect to the implementation is what I want us to do in the beginning or initially is build that system, right? And have an ability on both the operator side on the workload cluster as well as on the management cluster to expose what data is needed by an operator, right? Right? Or whatever thing we consume. So basically you need a way to request what data you are interested in, and then you get it. And then what to do with that, in my view, we will have to do a reference implementation, but we should not build a system yet, or at least not for now, that does that in a very generic way, because I believe that every vendor will pick its own way of doing stuff. So for me, that's why the drawing is a bit confusing, because I look at the system like that I was trying to explain. So there is a collector on the workload cluster. There is a consumer, right? So there is a provider. So first of all, we need to provide the data to the metric collector, and then there is a consumer of that data locally, right? Which is an operator. And then we have that data will be collected on the management cluster, on which you have again a consumer that consumes that data based on its needs. And I think that's the first thing we need to do.
Yeah, I think I 100% agree with you on the first thing we need to do, because this diagram is basically taking collectively workload and management cluster together. So yeah, fine. I think the first point is clear to everyone. I think like this is from where we need to start. Like have a Prometheus configurations to collect the data, and if we can specify what needs to be collected, which I was trying to put it in here, and then see how to change the condition, like for example the status, right, based on whatever user says, and then action can be irrespective of whether we take it or we show it or we build a system that is a different part. So I think we are in sync, right?
Because the first step is a lot of work, right? I mean, it's not easy peasy.
Yes. We'll start with that. I'm ready to work on that. Happy to start with that for sure.
Yeah. One more thing, Wim, you mentioned about local Prometheus taking action.
No, not correct.
Yeah. Are you specifying kind of a real-time loop here?
No, but in Prometheus you have an aggregate way, right? So you could say in Prometheus, okay, if I do this and that, I expose this, right? So that's something that you can do inside of the Prometheus system.
Great. That is a good point. We are not, at least I am not aware of it. Good. So, and second thing is, I want to know one more thing from Prometheus, right? Can we extend the Prometheus, for reading any data? Can it be extended to get data from external system? Not necessarily pod related, but
Yes, not that's easy. That's easy.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Great.
so Prometheus pull from a particular port.
Yeah.
So all you need is just have an application
Exactly.
writing something on a port. Prometheus has permission to read those ports, and that's it.
And like CPU and memory and stuff like that, I think you can. It's a while that I looked at it, but at the time, I think there is even a piece of code that if you install it on your machine, it does it automatically.
Yeah.
You just have to tell me where the data should go, and that's it.
Yeah. It's quite configurable actually. Yeah.
But it's the same like if when I built an operator, I always built. So there is a default. By default, if you use controller runtime, all the Go statistics like how many threads, how many CPU, how much memory you consume and stuff like that, all the Go stats you get for free automatically through Prometheus.
Yeah.
So what I typically do when I build an operator, there is this kube RBAC proxy, right, which basically exposes an endpoint. And if you point that to Prometheus, you get all the data automatically.
Great.
That's so now, of course, the additional metrics like the 3V ones that you have to do something for, but there is a lot of stuff you can get out of the box.
Yeah.
One more thing, Wim and Stephen both are here. Since see, it looks like Prometheus client and action it can take locally, and Prometheus server in the management cluster and action it take locally. It looks much similar to this edge watcher and edge aggregator. Right?
No,
yes.
so
Now,
so I treat status as a way of telling people that if something is wrong, basically, right? So this is basically for that intent.
I think my view, Stephen, is that status aggregator and watcher has been I call it a specific implementation, right? Whereas so what I'm aiming for with the system that I was explaining is a generic implementation, right? So which you consume in a specific way by a specific consumer. So that's why what's my initial view on it. So sometimes it's good to build a very specific thing for a very specific use case, but if you look at what or at least my view on Nephio is it's much wider, and I believe that we don't need to have let's say a watcher agent purely for the deployment. We should have a generic metric collector or whatever what we just discussed, that you can then interface with to consume data, right? And I think that will serve a way bigger scope than doing something specific. The specific implementation is good to show what can be done, but I think in general, if we can make it more generic, it would serve way more use cases.
Okay.
That's my 2 cents. I interrupted you.
I know. So if I mean, we are close to that. So I think I have initially gone through all those things and I had this thing in my mind that maybe we'll come down to this actually. So that's why I had put it here. That maybe the next action item is, see how to pull the metrics from all the applications. So maybe I put it as an action item, and I think we're going in this direction. So maybe if you want me to take this action, I can take it.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Yeah, the only thing the downside of Prometheus, what I said is that real status is sometimes you have to do something to make it look good.
I mean, exactly. It's a lot of stuff. Actually, it's not that straightforward. Whatever my experience is there. If you can think the CPU and all those things, sometimes it's very easy. But if you start getting configuration and getting the different resources, you have to write many things. So we can do that, no problem. We'll see that.
Yeah. By the way, what is Steven view? This status edge watcher. See, Wim want to bring some generic metric service there. What about Steven's view? He must be having something. When he introduces edge watcher and edge status aggregator.
So this is built by our team, our product team here. I also actually, to be honest, told them it would have been easier instead of building this whole framework by yourself. It would have been easier if you take advantage of tags and basically just you know, using recent code to expose you know, statuses. So because Prometheus only collect numbers, and then so you could put, if the operator figure out one possible reasons of why I say a status is actually not great, it could print it out. It could basically at least do a simple recent code on a either on a tag or something, and then expose that. That would be like, that to me was actually a much simpler way, because I actually told the team, this is after effect that they actually built it. The idea is the metrics link of going from any clusters to a cloud monitoring systems is one of the very basic things that usually people would set up. But then the watcher to ESA connections is a connection that they have to punch a hole on real deployment. Usually people white box, whitelisted or everything on the edge clusters. So in here they have to set a specific open road, open port numbers and things for their firewalls. So it's not as simple as you just say, you know, I have a gRPC server and then things would just flow. So no, I was actually advocating that. It's just it was basically sort of after effect. I think John and I actually talked about that too. And this, so I'm not against it. I'm just saying that on this particular things we have an implementation that by and large works, and then and we are, and it's not a good baseline engine to collect metrics. In my mind, this is all implemented. The way we take advantage of that is operators still needs to have knowledge on how to say a status is the status is not great, and that decision, how to make that decision beyond the simple statuses that we actually expose, is still an unknown actually in a way. But then the only use case, the one major use case I could see in anything is if someone ever say that the status is not great, and at that moment we'll be able to evaluate on the management clusters through some analytic engines and things based on the data that we have collected on the aggregation by aggregates, not the aggregator, but then by aggregates on metric systems or log collections and things like that that gets all streamed back to a centralized place, and then maybe like evaluate it or analyze it at that moment. Why does an operator thinks that it's actually having problem, and then maybe the operator sees the problem is not actually the root of the problem, you know, that kind of stuff. But beyond that, in terms of saying, can we aggregate statuses through Prometheus directly? Obviously, yes, because that's actually what I advocated internally too. But then again, this implementation is already in place, so we kind of see it. And well, I mean, anyway, in R1 it wasn't working yet, so so I'm okay if this turns out as a community, we decided let's go with recoding, if you will, the statuses into metrics and expose it using Prometheus or some other means. It doesn't need to be Prometheus only, and then be able to locally able to market. But then as Wim said, I mean, Prometheus allows you to set it up, so maybe that's one of the metrics that you want to keep a little longer. But then Prometheus that you want to set up on the edge is not something that you want to store for a very long durations. And then the way that we wanted to use it for now in the context of what we have discussed, the metrics that we store on the workload clusters are meant for very real-time read and react, basically. So statuses are something different. So you probably at some point do want to stream it back to the management clusters. So we have a more history views of seeing, what went wrong, what has went wrong, what has gone wrong over the
You think
deployment
that,
life cycle.
yeah, can the edge watcher or someone can, take all those things and put it in some place?
So we used to have an edge watcher. Oh, you mean edge watcher? Well, if you are using, this is actually interesting. Can you do Prometheus or like more federated way control for a federated setup? Obviously, yes. And then wouldn't that would be good enough? I would say for a collection perspective, yes. But then you still need something which would be able to take the statuses and be able to put them into context, which is
Okay.
one part of the edge status aggregator. The aggregator right now is because it has topology informations, and it actually has knowledge of at least the status structure, as I said. So they would be able to put contexts out of this. I mean, the goal is to be able to do some sort of very quick analyses of the root cost, because if something deviates because an SMF goes down, and then a lot of no new sessions could be made to the UPF, then obviously UPF are all like having problem switching things, and then they may have all exposed certain things too. In which case you can aggregate, you can then take that as a problem, probably the root of the problem as a possibility. But then that's a vision that hasn't been realized yet. But in this case, it's just regular Prometheus. So your Prometheus aggregates from all the different clusters. We store them for a long time, and then there's an applications that will read from that, and then sort of start putting together a long-term view of what the deployment looks like.
Yeah. Okay.
Because
all right,
in a way you can say that this reflects back to the topology, and
right.
the topology is a CL by itself, and then as a resource it should have status. So that status reflects on the aggregates of all the every single the aggregates of all the NF deployed out of this topology.
Okay. I think this topic is good. What question I had like for a very long time, can you give me an example of a high level intent which Nephio tends to solve? Because I have got quite a few, but I just wanted to hear from you or Wim.
High level
the
intent of
yeah, for both of them. Like for example, if it is a KPI based intent or some sort of a capacity based intent of NF, for example, so and so, capability of a 2G network, 4G network, something like that, or can it be infrastructure way of intent? Both. Can you give me a typical clear example of it, please? Because I've been looking for it for a long time and I have got my own, but I would just want to validate.
So my view, I mean, before I guess I'll jump over them. For us right now, the intent, the NF deployment intent is very tied up with the deployment parameters. So we do in operators, for example, we have translations to take a capacity requirements and map it into how much CPU memories that we need. So that's one. It's not high level intent per se, but it is an intent that is exposed that would be input by users, or maybe input by users on a high level perspective by saying that I need X number of subscribers with that much average throughput or so on, or maximum sessions and so on, and then we will translate that into a deployment topology, and then each of that will create what the capacity requirements of each instance would be. And then capacity tends to be application specific. So when we talk about a capacity for SMF is the maximum of sessions, the capacity for AMF is the maximum number of subscribers, and then for UPF it's
Yes.
just throughput. Yeah, so
Okay.
those are application level capacity. So they don't. So if we have better test beds, and they directly map. Let's say, for example, we have a platform that has DPU. Then they would say, oh, to meet that capacity requirements, I need to start using a accelerator. And that would be translated directly by the operators that knows about that particular platform they're running.
It's all boiling down to the operator, to how to realize that intent. If we, as a Nephio, we have given that control to vendors or whoever is designing the network. Am I correct?
Yes.
Right. As a Nephio, we are not providing any framework for them to come in and
as Nephio, we model, if you will. We have a model which is more tied up with the application that we're targeting in this case. So we try to make intent. I mean, still, I think it's still not at a very high level, to be honest, but then high level enough that we will still give vendor a lot of freedom of how to map that intent into actuations.
And that is work, right? That's quite a work, isn't it? What do you say?
It's work. Well, we should not, as Nephio, be able to, and we won't be able to really, for every single vendor, very specifically, because at the end it boils for operator today anyway. It boils down to how you would create basically a pod spec, right? The container specifications, and those comes with resources. And we would not be able to say, to that level of detail would be bad at the Nephio level. So our collective mind comes up with capacity based on this kind of specifications. And then it could improve. But then for now we do this, and then we'll hand it over to vendor operators to make sure that they should be the one who knows for their NF running on a particular platform, what does it mean?
Yeah, I understand. This is perfectly fine, and this is what Wim was also saying, that we let them do it. We let them do it. My just small 2 cents is that, do you think that this will deter the amount of work the operator needs to do? This can deter the the vendors to go into the Nephio eco world? Because what are the, I mean, this is completely off topic, but this is I'm using, I got this opportunity to ask you. So I'm asking because they're not many people whose time I want to waste. So I'm asking in this session. So would you think kind of benefit we want to give from the Nephio to the world can be only realized if the vendor does more work, right? And do you think it can deter them to come to the Nephio world?
In my view, so here is the thing, right? Okay, if I may answer.
Go ahead.
Please.
So here is the thing, right? And this is I don't believe it's understood well. Okay. Everything that we are doing in Nephio, you can do in other ways, right? My view is the effort that you have to consume to maintain and keep it up to date. I first of all create and keep it up to date. Going to be less if you take a Nephio approach, or let's say a Nephio for me is KRM and stuff like that. If you take that approach, the effort you have to spend and the ease of use that you provide to the service provider or the operators is going to be lower, right? That's for me, how I look at Nephio as the ultimate goal, right? So in other words, what we are talking about here, we can all do in our own vendor-specific ways, right? But now I deploy Samsung and Nokia in Telus, right? And then Telus needs to consume the specifics of Nokia and the specific of Samsung, right? So the burden, we put a lot of burden on the operator, you see? So, and I believe that whole ecosystem is going to be way more efficient if we try to work upon a framework. So that's why I'm saying is, let's first define how our observability system looks like inside of Nephio, right? And then start building pieces of it, because at the moment, every vendor probably has its own way on how it should look like. And they have its own view on how it should be consumed. And that's why I'm of the opinion, let's build that, let's say, baseline.
Yeah.
And then we start showing how it can be used. But I mean, will it lower the effort? So the problem that so that is, I mean, the goal of Nephio. The challenge that we have in Nephio is that the systems exist, right? And there's a lot of system exists. Like that's why we have the discussion between Helm and Nephio sometimes, right? Why we have this. And so same for metrics. I mean, every vendor has its own metric collector system, right? They're exposing, but it's all their own way, right? And so so that is so it's a chicken and egg problem in my view, and it's not. It will take time, and so that's why I'm saying is what is the biggest bang for the buck that you're going to get. So the reason I'm focused on this, at least in Nokia at the moment, we have been asked to start building operators. So we have been asked to solve like ISSU and canary testing, right? Which today is a lot of manual work, right? Or we have tools and stuff like that that help do it, but it's a lot of work. So I was able to converse the people to say, go for the operator approach, right? So we are now building the system. Now, okay, those people have lots of questions, but at least it was the opportunity, or we got the opportunity to have them focus more on a Nephio type of approach to build that system rather than trying to then do something again completely out of the box, right? Okay. So, and that's the chicken and egg problem. So you have to find those elements on which you can inject, right? And it's not so easy. That's for me. That's why Helm is going to be a very tough one, right? Because every vendor has invested so much that if they say, okay, now you have to move to operator, it's going to be it's an uphill battle because they say, okay, we've done all this work, it works, custom consume it, so why should I change, right? But if so we have to, so that's the challenge we have, I think, in general. But there are insertion points, right? And I think, in my view, this piece is actually an insertion point that Nephio could, so that, for example, if we build an operator for Canary and ISSU, right? Then building an operator to deploy is fairly straightforward, right? Because the ISSU and Canary are 5 times more complicated than doing an ISSU. Than doing a deployment, sorry. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, so please go ahead.
Yeah, so that's why I'm saying is that this area is a potential, is a good, could be a Trojan horse potentially.
So in other words, if I just try to paraphrase, is that now everything is boiling down to how you build your controller and what better capability your controller, an operator has, like for example, Kate operator I'm talking about. So the more everybody is coming down to the operator. So in crux of the Nephio is come to the operator based system, right? Have a good operator which actuates your infrastructure or NF, and everybody contributes to the actual, let's say for TELUS, you give some operator, Samsung gives some operator, and that's the world we are trying to converge on, right?
Yes, and if we for me, what we are trying to do here, if we can build the framework outside of the operators that we interact with, right, and have an ability to get metrics and stuff like that. If we can ease that, then we already solve a huge burden for the vendor.
Yeah, I got that. Absolutely got that point, and I understand.
Yeah, actually, I did suggest to internally that doing this set of cloud service integration as even just as a reference onto Nephio would be a great thing to do moving forward, because everyone have different ways of setting up things, and then if we show that I mean, I'm not saying we standardize a way to actually do it or standardize a particular projects to do certain things, but then if we just ease up that kind of installation in general, and then we can set it up such that we'll see in a context of doing a 5GC deployment or 5G RAN deployment moving forward, this set of set up integrations of other cloud services, Prometheus, Istio, and other things are useful, I think that actually is very beneficial. And in terms of how the use case of using it to build something on top of this, that's a great reference to do moving forward. And things for people to explore. Maybe they haven't thought of actually.
Yeah. So I think it's a good
But
starting
then
point.
for now,
I think, sorry to interrupt, but I think we have converged into some good common grounds, and I think that's a good starting point. We can build it up from here. Maybe we can discuss this, the update this, and share ideas more frequently on this, and maybe the progress which we are trying to make, right? So maybe if we can set up some more meetings, or maybe use some other working groups somewhere. I think WG4 is what I schedule generally. I don't know whether this is part of that for sure.
Well, once we get into more implementations, we can based on what John and Wim wants, we can create a subgroup at SIG2. And then we already have a channel on Slack, so we can always use that to talk. And that I guess Wim and I would respond very quickly on this. And then if it comes to a time where we need much more focus, then I think we can create a subgroup.
I agree with you.
So what I would suggest we do, right? Because I mean, on one hand, it's more of an architecture thing, right? So one of the things that we could, what I would say is because we've discussed here how many people are we? 4 or 5, right? So what I suggest maybe is that we could maybe do it first in SIG2, right? Is build the building blocks that we believe are involved in this framework. Okay.
Right.
So and try to get a consensus on that, right? So that's for me step number 1, right?
Right.
Once I think it's because I see this is more technically oriented, right? And then I think from the moment
you can see that Wim is a man of actions instead of just talking endlessly to someone. I mean, let's not name names. and then get consensus from that group. We will basically just do the work and then show people that this works.
And then so my suggestion is you go to SIG2, right? We discussed it, so we can basically dedicate half an hour or something next meeting potentially, right? And then let's say we get consensus maybe after 1 or 2 meetings, I don't know, right? What I would suggest is go and present to SIG1, right? To say, okay, there's the framework that we are working on. And then we can basically say, okay, are there elements we can do in R2 or something like that that we believe are feasible? And then let's focus on that, right? So for me, that's the way probably to do it, and then we can get the buy-in.
Instead of keep on doing architectural presentations to SIG1 before doing stuff, that's probably the better way to do it. I don't think anyone doubt that observability framework is needed. I don't think anyone in the community would say so.
I think that's a very nice step Wim has told, and I think we should follow that. And yes, I agree with this. Right. So I'll take some actions from this one to come up with something, because I would be happy to work on this one. So let's see whatever the discussion which we have, or maybe something I can think about it. And so next SIG2 meeting is on Wednesday, right?
Yes. I mean, we can. I don't know what we are at the moment. We have no agenda.
I mean, if you need more focused discussions, we can do that too. Because too many people tend to kind of deviate the kind of like go sideways and things.
Or what we can also do, is say on Wednesday, because either we have no topic or we have a few topics, because we have to start scoping release 2 somehow, right? That's a little bit the chicken and egg. So which probably is more important than this at the moment. So what we can also do is to announce that we will have a meeting, or we can even do it on Slack, right? Is from the moment you are ready, you could also have a dedicated meeting. So let's maybe see a little bit what happens for the Wednesday meeting. We either give you the full slot and then you have it, I think if not, then maybe we should announce a meeting either Thursday or Friday or something like that, depending on how fast you want to act, and then do a dedicated meeting potentially. Because okay, I can easily see this discussion take an hour at least.
Yeah, for sure. In a SIG2 meeting, will be so many people who will jump on this. I'm 100% sure. And then our meeting, the whole thing will be taken, by this.
But it's not unimportant, right? So it's good to have the discussion, because sometimes if we go act too fast and there is important viewpoints that we miss, then that's also not unimportant. So that's the problem with open source sometimes, is that I have too many opinions, is sometimes slow, but on the other hand, if they are important, they are also important, right? So and I think
we should discuss.
For me, getting that framework out of the door is, I think, the first step, right? And then we can say, okay, we'll tackle this piece first, and this second and third, and what have you, right? And then we'll take it from there.
Okay. The progress we'll discuss further on the observability Slack channel, and then we can take a call.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Stephen and Wim. I know it is past midnight.
No, I'm in Belgium. For me, it's early, so I'm 3 hours behind you, I think.
Okay. Stephen,
I think it's more Stephen. Stephen is
that's fine. That's fine.
Right. Thank you so much. Yeah, and
you're the one who chose this time.
Actually, it works better for me actually this time.
Yeah.
Yes. Stephen's time zone aligns more with me than with the US because of his kids, I think, right?
Okay. But we gained a lot, be Stephen, what architecture diagram currently in Nephio, what you have shown is really good, Probably we need to integrate our CLA, with that. And second one, what Wim's opinion, okay? Let's, give, to the Nephio, what to do and not how to do, So he's also indirectly telling, intent-based system and pro, So we gained a lot actually, from the discussions of both of you. Thank you so much.
All right, appreciate it.
Thank you for contributing. Anyway, so
Okay. If nothing else,
let's stop the recording.
Good night.